Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. All things Middle-earth here with a video on how to optimize the troops you're using on your commanders and why it's very, very important to do so. We're going to go through those reasons as well as an example from my account in just 1 second, so stay tuned. So first of all, I want to talk about why optimizing the troops you're using or optimizing your queues in the game. When I talk about queues, I mean the hiring queue you have as well as the conscription queue. It's going to vary slightly depending on where you're at in your season, what type of season you're playing. For me, this is Rebuilding Glory. It's non-roleplay, and we're just getting started about a week or a little bit more than a week in. So I only have 1 hiring queue and 3 conscription queues, although I will have up to 4 and 4 of each. So I'm going to try and go through and make it so that I'm using a balanced amount of troops on both my conscription and hiring queue. The reason you want to do this is because this may have happened to you before. It happens to me all the time. I've got a decent amount of command in my barracks. You know, right now, obviously, it's very full, but I could be fighting last season, for example, and I've got about half the command in my barracks, but I'm having a hard time filling up any of my commanders. And that's because my problem was I was running a commander like Witch King, Sauron, and Gorbag, for example. Gorbag uses 3 different types of orcs, Sauron uses 3 different types of evil men, and Witch King uses alchemists, mountain trolls, and fell beast. Although over last season it was a little bit different with the troops they had available, but still you get the idea. That's just 3 commanders and they all used different troops. So even if I had a couple thousand of each of those troop types in my barracks would look kind of full. I'd never be able to fully fill a commander, or if I took 1 bad hit, that was kind of it for the day because my troops were so spread out. So the idea here is to use as few troop types as possible on as many different commanders as possible, while still having some variety so you can compete in the meta. Because obviously, if you ran the same 3 troops on 8 commanders and those troops are countered by 1 commander, that could pose a problem for you, because especially as you go on in your season, people start to recognize, oh, this player runs these commanders, so on and so forth. So you want to have a variety while having a simplicity to your roster, if that makes sense. Now, if you're in roleplay, mine is non-roleplay. If you're in roleplay, it looks a little bit different. The hiring queues that you'll have will be from troops that you can capture through the use of neutral camps around the map. For me, it includes that as well as good alignment troops, because we're in Mordor. If you're playing as non-roleplay good, obviously you'd have your hiring queues would be evil. So it's going to vary slightly, and I think it's still very possible to do in roleplay, and I think you should optimize to the best of your ability. But I think in non-roleplay, you can get away with a little bit more, because you don't have to use gold to hire all the troops. If I were to use Guardians or Sentinels or any just random good side troop that's available in the normal barracks, they just cost resources, not gold. Whereas if you're in roleplay, all of your hiring queues cost gold, and some of those troops can be very, very expensive. So you may not be able to get 4 and 4, but you can still make sure you don't have 17 different troops being used on your conscription queues. And that covers the how and why you should be optimizing your queues. Again, I'm going to try this out all season on a very, very optimized roster, even not using commanders I normally would, to make sure this is doable. So if you want to check out some of our live streams, we stream several times throughout the week, sometimes even every day. You should definitely do so, because once we get started with PvP, I'll be showing you exactly what my experience is and if it differs from previous seasons where I ran 7, 8, 9 troops in a conscription queue, for example. And this season I have it down to exactly 4 troops in my conscription queue and 4 troops in my hiring queue. So let's go ahead and jump over to a spreadsheet that we have here for our team so I can show you very visually what this looks like for my lineup. Okay, so this is a spreadsheet put together by Law, a member of our team. So huge shout out to him for putting this together. This is just something for our team for the time being, and basically what I would do on paper every season, but this made it so clean and easy to lay things out and see. Again, you plug in all your commanders and your troops. It's got a lot of formulas and different things. And then it tells you, again, it's calibrated to our season for non-role play for an evil alignment faction like Mordor. But it calculates here the troops I'm using in the conscription queue and the troops I'm using in the hiring queue, so I could very visually see exactly what I'm using. And again, the commanders we're going to use are going to be Dwalin, Sunend, Sauron, Witch King, Khaldun, and Gandalf the Grey. So starting out in no particular order, we're going to be using Gandalf the Grey. Gandalf the Grey is an amazing tile taker. He's really versatile in non-role play especially. I don't love him in PvP usually, but we're going to try and use him this season because we've already leveled him a little bit. But we're going to be using a more damage-heavy build with him, running the Gigantic Hammer. Again, I don't have a great effect here. I mean, Frenzy is really solid for him with his heal, but it's not refined, so we're really just using the hammer for the attack stat. We're going to be running the Scale Mail with Melee Vigor. We're going to be running the Bone Mask with Hysteria, and the Palantir with Tactical Mark. Now, the Palantir and the Gigantic Hammer add army attack, so that's 9 army attack there, as well as a Hysteria Helm. The damage output is a little bit higher than your traditional Gandalf. That might be a little bit more tanky or a little bit more prone to draw out. The goal here is that he could be sent in pretty much anywhere and not get full wipe, but also run Reapers and have a kind of anti-sun end, anti-range build going. Dwalin is going to be using a blinding barrier helmet this season. Right now he doesn't have that on, but we're going to use a blinding barrier full helm, which reduces the focus, poison, and burn damage of knights. So we'll run a full stack of knights on Dwalin. And just use him as a damage commander who hard counters Witch Kings and Saurons because he runs a single stack, so that helps with madness. He has anti-focus. He has several types of burn protection. So he's just going to be this tanky, annoying to deal with, but cheap to use commander because he uses just tier 2 knights, which again, I think he'll be used more as a counter than someone I'd send into full stacks to see how he does. Next up is going to be my Witch King. Witch King is going to be running the Alchemist. We're going to be running the War Beasts, and we're going to be running the Fell Beasts. Now, I do want to explain this a little bit because I'm going to be using Great Beasts on a few commanders instead of Mountain Trolls, and I'll see how this works out. I understand it's going to be an expensive experiment, so this is kind of as long as I can afford it, I'm going to do it situation. But basically, the Bulwark ability is that enemies prioritize this unit, where the Mountain Trolls just taunt for the first 3 rounds. So technically, the Great Beast is a tanking for the entire battle, but that does mean you're going to go through more of them because they're being prioritized all the time instead of the first 3 rounds. But the commanders I'm using them on typically don't do well going long rounds anyway, so usually it's going to be all or nothing anyway. So if it's Witch King, if he's going to win in the first 2 or 3 rounds, he's going to win. If not, he's going to get wiped. So we're going to run these on Witch King as our tank. Again, not super common. Obviously, for ranged commanders, they do buff their damage, so we'll use them on our Sun End as well, which I'll talk about in a second. But we are going to try them out as our tank on Witch King and see what we can get done. On our Witch King, we're using pretty standard gear, at least for what we have and what we've used for a while. We have the Cutlass with melee might. We have the Scale Mail with melee vigor. We'll switch to a burn chest once we get to fighting in PvP. We have the Aegis Helm, the Cask of the Submerged Owl, which I just recently got. I've been before just switching between a Horseman's Helm with stun or madness, depending on what I'm fighting. But we have the Aegis Helm now, and a Palantir with the tactical mark. So that's the gear there on Witch King. Next up is going to be Sauron. I'm running Sauron and Khaldun. They're both going to be running half trolls and halberdiers. Again, usually I'd run a 3 troop type comp on both those commanders. However, we're trying to over the top optimize our barracks, and so we're going to try just the 2 types of evil men and see how we like that. I think it's going to be very close in performance, but I'll definitely be updating if that was something that worked out for me. But again, for Sauron's gear, we have the Carver with Smite, we have the Great Plate of the East with Hazard Training, we have the Bone Mask with Manipulate. I like Manipulate a little bit better on Sauron than Hysteria because he already does a lot of madness. And then we have the Worn Out Smoking Pipe with Sustain. On Khaldun, who I already mentioned, he's going to be running just a pretty standard set of melee boosting and damage reducing gear. I might look to switch to a Gigantic Hammer if I'm able to, although again, the gear is, I don't have crazy amount of them, so he may not end up getting one, but we'll see. But otherwise, it's going to be a Cutlass with melee might, Scale Mail with melee vigor, a full helm with melee vigor, and the Drums of Moria. Right now, it's got Haste of Soldiers. We might change that because the accessories, there's not a whole lot of other options that I have personally. We could also look at running an anti-cav build. There is an anti-cav effect on both the Easterling Spear and the Wizard's Fireworks. We might try and run a super anti-cav build on him because the idea is that I run some meta commanders like Witch King, Sauron, Sun End, and then some anti-commanders like Khaldun for anti-mounted commanders for all those Theodens I see, Dwalin for the anti-Witch King and Sauron, and then we would run the Gandalf the Grey as an anti-ranged build, including Sun End, hopefully, with the Reapers. Again, a lot easier said than done, but on paper, I've got some meta commanders and I've got some counters for other meta commanders. And last but not least is our Sun End. Sun End's going to be using the Gigantic Hammer. I've got 2 of them, neither one refined like I mentioned earlier, so she does have some benefit with Frenzy as well with her Feint ability, but either way, she'll probably be using one of the 2 if I decide to leave it on Gandalf to have more healing, or on her for a chance for higher procs of her Feint ability. But either way, she's got a Gigantic Hammer. We do have the Ranger's Shroud as well as the Hunter's Guide, which is refined 4 times. And then we have again, before I usually would run the Palantir of Orthanc on her, I'm probably going to right now. I just had it on Gandalf for some extra damage. So I got to figure out who's going to have what gear because they're sharing a little bit right now. But that is Sun End. And again, we're going to run the Great Beasts on her as well. In addition to Witch King, we're going to be running Arbalist, and then we're going to be running an Evil Men troop type. And like you saw from the spreadsheet, we have half trolls and halberdiers available. So I'll probably run the half trolls when possible because they'll do a little bit more damage, since we'll have a really true tank with the Great Beasts. We'll have a little bit more damage in the back with the half trolls. But either way, we're just running one of the types. So we'll get 30% damage from Heraldic Tactics with that one Evil Men type. We'll get the 20% from our tank from the Great Beast. Hopefully that helps her hang around a little bit longer to be a little bit more of an issue to deal with. But that is the last commander that I'm planning on maining this season. And honestly, that's pretty much it. Unless I get fully wiped and have 0 command in my barracks, I should have enough overlap with my troops that I can fill up different commanders. Now, I've got other commanders that have decent respect. I've got leftover gear, even if it starts to get in my blue gear. But, you know, my Grima, my Gothmog, Malthasara, Kieran, some of those commanders I can use to sweep all season long. If you guys aren't sweeping, you definitely should be doing so. You get grain from doing that, and you can just seriously level up your commanders a ridiculous amount by sweeping. So not only getting a better start with those commanders who you could use as backups, but also just keeping your resource production high is never a bad thing. So I'll use those 6 commanders on the field. I'll have everyone else that can sweeping. All the other scrubs who are level 10 and below or whatever are going to be pathing around like nobody's business. And we're going to see how it works. Again, I'm really excited for it. In the past, I have had lots of times where I feel like I have a lot of command in my barracks, but I can't quite utilize it. So this season, like, I'm not using someone like Gorbag, for example, who I've invested really heavily in. Again, if we get to a point where I feel like I have enough time to make an extra Orc troop and run him, I will. But adding a Gorbag in or a Witch King, they both usually unique troops for whatever, you know, for everything else I was using. So I couldn't keep both. And let's be real, if you guys watch the channel, you know I love the Witch King. He's my favorite commander. So I'm going to use him, although no knocking Gorbag. He has had the best start for me in Mordor, but he's not going to continue into PvP for me, at least at this time. But we're going to see how it goes, and I'll let you guys know again at mid-season, at the end of the season as well. We'll probably do an update video on how the optimizing works. If I regret it, I don't think I'm going to. Assuming we have the resources to keep up with it, I think it's going to be the best fighting season we ever have, where hopefully I can just fight all the time and not have those situations where barracks is about half full, but I can't really fight because I can't fill everyone up. But we will see, so make sure you stay tuned to the channel for the update on that one. But that's going to do it for me in this video, and I'll see you all in the next one.